And there you are. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Thank you for joining us here at Torah to the Tribes. Greetings to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. So glad to have you tuning in this Sabbath. Greet one another in the chat. In the description down below, you can register for the Feast of Tabernacles, or as we call it, Sukkot at Sukkost 2025. We've got RV spots, tent spots, cabins, or if you want to, you can do Airbnb, nice condos looking down on us low-class people in the campground, or the glamp ground, I should say. It's actually really lovely. Anyway, do come. We'd love to revisit with old friends and meet new friends in the Torah community. We are in chapter 18 of the Wisdom of Solomon. We're getting near the end, brethren. Getting near the end. Put in the chat what you want me to teach on next. I don't know. What shall I teach on? And please do consider supporting Torah to the Tribes with your financial giving and donations. You can donate down below by texting Torah to that number down below, or you can go to the website torahtothetribes.com/donate/. Let's dig into the Apocrypha. Brenton Septuagint is my choice. I love the hardback. I love flipping through the leaves of the paper. But today we're in chapter 18, and of course it's building, building, building as we go through this wisdom, or in the Hebrew, Chokmah of Solomon. And it's building upon what we spoke about last week, and we're going to see again the account of the Exodus, specifically Passover. We've got one night, but two outcomes. One night, two outcomes. One life, two outcomes. The way of the righteous, the way of the wicked. Nevertheless, thy saints had a very great light, whose voice they hearing, and not seeing their shape, because they also had not suffered the same things. They counted them happy, but for that they did not hurt them now, of whom they had been wronged before. They thanked them and besought them pardon, for that they had been enemies. So there's one night in history where, on the Passover, you've got the fate of two nations was decided in one night. What a fateful night. And that's a night that we celebrate historically. That and baptism, mikvah, are the oldest rituals that we still perform and partake each and every year. So one night in history when the entire fate of two nations was decided. On one side of the river there was a people huddled in homes, and then on the other side of the river there was people waiting for the judgments, waiting for, of course, that silence of death moving through the streets. So that you could choose to come in within the home, you could eat the lamb in haste, you could be shielded by the blood, and you could be waiting for the dawn to rise. Or, conversely, you could be wrapped in wealth, seemingly, wrapped in power, seemingly, with all the might and power of the Egyptian gods, but really, they were ultimately helpless against the silence of death that was sneaking throughout the streets. So Solomon, in this chapter, he revisits that night in this chapter and reframes it as a supernatural drama. Because we've got the word, the dabar, the word leaping from heaven like almost a sword. And we know that the word is a sword that can cut through bone and marrow and cut asunder. But the word, Ephesians tells us, is also a shield. So there is both death, the sword, and a shield, deliverance. And that's what the word is. The word of Yahweh is a death blow to some, but it's deliverance to others. And that's what I'm seeing in this whole chapter. And last week, it's been building that you've got one aspect, but two outcomes. In this instance, one night, Passover, but two outcomes. So it's about contrasts. contrast between the wicked and the righteous, and how creation either works for you or against you, depending on where you align yourself. So there's lots of elemental forces, alignment, balance, and it's all about being in alignment and balance with the Most High. So this chapter, of course, begins with a great contrast. We've got light for the saints, the called out assembly, and we've got darkness for the Egyptians. And the darkness represents the unraveling of Egypt's false power. Just like we're seeing today. You walk down on the streets and you go, man, this used to be a nice city in the 90s. And now it's full of degradation and darkness. Why? Because there is an unraveling of the world's power. And if you're a believer, you see it. Systems are breaking down. It's not working anymore. That world is not working. Colleges and institutions are breaking down. So the world is unraveling because it is based upon false power and false light. And that we see is the sham of not only the Egyptians, but the sham of our modern day Egypt or Babylonia. So there's a pattern that comes into view. 6 things. Number 1, we've got judgment and mercy are simultaneous. Number 2, the same act of Yahweh becomes death to one and life to another. Number 3, the decisive fact is alignment and covenant. We've got to be aligned and we've got to be in covenant because that's decisive on the outcome of our life. Number 4, going back to Exodus chapter 10, darkness covers Mitzrayim, Egypt, but contrastly, Israel has the light. Number 5, going back to Exodus chapter 12, the death of the firstborn, and then, of course, the birth of Israel, Yahweh's firstborn, into freedom. And then finally, number 6, we'll see in Numbers chapter 16, Aaron. Aaron, with incense, of course, halts the plague, and we have this priestly image that is going to be permeating through the text here in Wisdom chapter 18. So these aren't random plagues. These are divine acts. And these are divine lessons. They're divine lessons about who really sustains us. Who sustains us? And who cannot escape Yahweh's judgment? Who sustains us and who cannot escape the judgment? And the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, it picks up on this same paradoxical theme, if you will. In 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 15, the same gospel, well, it's one thing to one and another to another. It's an aroma to life to some, but to others, it's the stench of death. It's the same gospel. To some it's life, to some it's death. John chapter 1, verse 5, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Paradoxical. Hebrews chapter 7, Yahweh, of course, the Kohen Hagadol, the high priest, he intercedes like Aaron, but once and for all. Paradoxical. The same dividing line persists. There's one word, 2 outcomes. One word, 2 outcomes. So, power then is double-edged, a double-edged sword. And we as saints can open or bind depending upon our prayers. Are our prayers in alignment with the Creator? That's why I like to pray the word back to Yahweh, because then we know that we're in alignment and our prayers are powerfully answered. We're not just randomly rumbling off words, but we're actually praying Scripture so that we can be in alignment. Likewise, in Wisdom chapter 18, shows the Almighty Word in verse 15 as a man of war, both terrifying and saving, both destroying Egypt and guiding Israel. Paradoxical. So what's counterfeit collapses, and what's consecrated actually remains standing. What's counterfeit collapses, what's consecrated stands. And think about it in life. So many people, they just can't handle it when a bit of pressure hits them. It's amazing. It's like, they just can't navigate pressure. What's wrong with them? They turn away from it. When I go, well, hang on a minute, why don't we just use the pressure? Sure, we're going to have to face pressures in life, but why run from pressure? Let's use the pressure. Let's use it. Because pressure, depending on how you use it, will give you two different outcomes. Pressure, it can burst pipes. But pressure can also create diamonds. Depends how you use it. Use the pressure. Direct the pressure. Use it. The same force produces collapse or brilliance depending on what material it hits. So when pressure hits you, you have the decision on how to let that pressure work in your life. I choose to turn it into diamonds rather than burst pipes. And here in chapter 18, that same night, pressure if you will, that same word, pressure if you will, that same pressure for Egypt, it was destruction. Well, for Israel, it wasn't destruction, was it? It was the same pressure. It was perseverance. And that is what we see. So chapter 18 isn't about two different acts of Yahweh. That's not what it's about. But it's about one act of Yahweh that splits along the line of covenant. And that's how the Bible works. It's one act of Yahweh, and it splits along the line of covenant. And I would say that's how life works. That's how life works. For Egypt, it was a night of fear, a night of loss, a night of judgment. For Israel, it was a night of light, it was a night of guidance, and it was a night of covenant assurance. So when Yahweh's word acts, which of course we know it does, will it strike us as a sword or as a shield? Will his fire consume us or will it guide us? Will his pressure crush us or will it refine us? Do you see what I'm saying here? This is great stuff. I'll start from the top again because I'm kind of rambling. Nevertheless, thy saints had a very great light, whose voice they hearing, and they not seeing their shape, because they also had suffered the same things. Which camera am I on? This one, thank you. They counted them happy, verse 2. But for they did not hurt them now, of whom they had been wronged before. They thanked them and besought them pardon, for that they had been enemies. Instead whereof thou gavest them a burning pillar of fire, both to be a guide of the unknown journey, and a harmless sun to entertain them honorably. Verse 4. For they were worthy to be deprived of light, and imprisoned in darkness, who had kept thy Son shut up, by whom the uncorrupt light of the Torah was given unto the world. And when they had determined to slay the babes of the saints, one child being cast forth, and saved to reprove them, thou tookest away the multitude of their children, and destroyedst them altogether in the mighty water. Of that night were our fathers certified afore, that assuredly knowing unto what oaths they had given credence, they may afterwards be of good cheer. So of thy people was accepted both the salvation of the righteous and the destruction of thine enemies. So we had a night of judgment last week in chapter 17. To this week, we've got Israel's night of illumination and release. So Solomon is rereading the Passover for us. We've got darkness. We've got pillar of fire. We've got the rescue of Moshe. We've got the Red Sea. We've got the firstborn. It's all coming into light as we go through these first 7 verses, because this is a moral teaching. The same Elohim who judges oppressors by creation's forces glorifies the called out ones by the very same creation. And if that hasn't been a light bulb unto you the past few weeks, it certainly has for me. The same creation works on the wicked one way, and it works on the righteous another way. And you see that in verse 8 specifically. Again, just like last week, what comes into frame is the Hebrew phrase midah, mekeneg midah, measure for measure. And this is justice ordered by covenant fidelity. As believers, I think we need to hear Yahweh's guiding voice without necessarily, looking to form. This world is always looking to form and substance, but we need to be the people that listen for the still small voice. The still small voice. Because this is called, and you and I are called, to an auditory obedience. Are we not? Do you hear? Can you not hear? Can you not hear? Do you not hear with a blood-tipped ear? It's not about what you see. It's not about looking to form. It's an auditory obedience that Yahweh is requiring of you. We need to move from visionary fixation, which is mystery Babylon, to auditory obedience, which is the kingdom of heaven. So put that in your bookmark. We need to move from visionary fixation, which is mystery Babylon, to auditory obedience, which is the kingdom of heaven. And if you can remember that simple phrase, it will help you through the great tribulation. Agreed? Because, man, they are going to do a lot of visionary effects to deceive the masses, and they will be using AI to do it. So much better that we have auditory obedience to the word and prayer. So, in this section, Yahweh supplies a burning pillar of fire. What is that? It's functional light. It's functional light. Guidance through an unknown way. And, of course, he gives them honoring warmth, the harmless sun, as it's phrased in this text, showing us both direction and dignity. And I think about how I was saved, and I think about the people that I've met over the years and their stories of how they were saved. There's so much direction and dignity with our Savior. When he just picks us up from the mud, from the sewers, from the streets, but with such love and such dignity. He didn't have to do that. And you read that in Isaiah, just how he washes Jerusalem, washes and salts, and wants to take care of those he loves. Direction and dignity is how Yahweh cares for his people. So Egypt, contrastly, imprisoned Yahweh's sons. So they therefore were imprisoned themselves in darkness. And Israel is chosen to bear the uncorruptible light of the Torah to the world. So that tells me that Torah then is a missionary light. And we've seen that with Torah to the tribes. I can't tell you how many people, again, this week reach out and say, oh, this teaching, that teaching, and they may have been a decade ago, 2 decades ago, that I may have forgotten about. But Torah is a missionary light, and it's still impacting people today. Still impacting people today. So Moshe comes into view in verse 5. And of course, it's reflective of Shemot, Exodus chapter 2, where we see the rescued infant becomes Yahweh's actual rebuke to a regime that actually murders infants. Right? Exodus chapter 1, verse 22. What's that? That's measure for measure. You tried to murder Moshe. You tried to murder the infants. Well, now Measure for measure. Yahweh takes away their multitude and then destroys them in the very same waters that they try to destroy the infants in. Measure for measure. Israel was taught in advance so that they could keep the night, the Passover, with good cheer, as it says. So Passover then, in essence, builds our confidence. And I think the Moedim, all of the Moedim, the feasts and festivals of Yahweh, they're supposed to build our confidence in Yahweh. Salvation of the righteous and the destruction of enemies, that's what comes into view, and it's what happens at the Moedim. We have one act and dual outcomes, because when the saints come together at the Moedim in the future, there will be safety and light, but outside of the camp, destruction and darkness. The same instruments that punished the adversaries glorified the called out assembly, because creation's ambivalence is therefore covenant indexed, if you will. So, three things that popped into my mind when I was in this section of the text. When we encounter true liberation in our lives, which we do through reading the Word, through prayer, and by coming into relationship with the Savior, then true liberation should produce three things: restraint, reconciliation, and gratitude. Not vengeance, because true freedom is authenticated by forgiveness. That's hard, but that's true freedom. You'll only be truly free when you can forgive. Otherwise, you're going to be burdened. Measure for measure, verses 4, 5, and 8 tell us. The tool of oppression, measure for measure, was water. The tool of oppression was a decree that went forth. That became the means of judgment. Conversely, the tool of salvation was a pillar and light, became honor for the called out assembly. So Passover teaches us hope before the crisis. So when the night comes, courage is already embedded in the soul, right? You're already courageous. You already know that Yahweh is going to be with you, that you're going to get through the darkness. Why do we read the book of Revelation? Why do we read the prophets? Why do we read Zechariah? Because when the darkness comes, we'll know that we'll get through the night, because our soul will be prepared. And the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, harmonizes this. There's light and cooling in John chapter 1 verse 5, John chapter 8 verse 12, and in 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 9, the called out of the darkness into his marvelous light. There's, of course, the pillar of cloud, the mikvah, or the baptismal typology in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, where we're baptized into Moshe, mikvahed into Moshe, and into the cloud and into the sea. And then we've got, of course, Messiah being the Passover in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 28. By faith, Messiah kept the Passover as we are. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, we see Messiah, our blessed Passover. And in Luke chapter 2, verse 32, we have light for the revelation to the nations. So the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, is picking up on these harmonious themes of the Passover, which I think are embedded right here in Wisdom of Solomon chapter 18. So Yahweh's guidance then could be viewed as gifted light, because it's not a humanly seized force like a lamp or a torch, but it is gifted life. So then what's revealed is true dominion over elements adheres to covenant alignment. Think about that. Because without it, elemental forces reverse. In Exodus chapter 9 through Exodus chapter 14, we see that. elemental forces reverse against the wicked. This guards against wicked inversions, because wicked inversions just bring about empty shells and broken power. And we don't need all the answers that the world needs. They're looking for answers for everything and not finding them. But we don't need all the answers before we make our move, because we have faith and we move by faith. We just need the right light to make our next move. And we use the light of his word. It's like using the pillar as step wisely strategy, right? They could step wisely because they had the pillar showing them the way. All that to say this: when we're aligned, we have symmetry. And then the traps that are set for us become their trap, the wicked's trap themselves. Just like the psalmist says, it's measure for measure justice. Water meant to kill Hebrew boys, well, it actually becomes Egypt's judgment. The same night breaks some, and it blesses others. And when Yahweh leads, his fire doesn't just show the way, it lifts our head out of the miry clay. And the sea that swallows Pharaoh is the path that actually carries us through. You see, alignment flips the environment in your favor. That's my takeaway these past few weeks, is that alignment with the Most High flips the environment in your favor, whatever environment you find yourself in. Walking with the Most High each and every day, you find the day starts working with you. The day turns to guidance, and the day turns obstacles into exits. We can't waste power on payback, though. We have to be forgivers. We must use deliverance as leverage, and then we move on with our lives. We take our wins, we take our losses, and we move on. Passover trains us to be courageous. Courage before the night, so that in the night, light becomes our destiny. And that's powerful. You don't get bogged down in the darkness and the bad things that happen to you. Look at verse 8. For wherewith thou didst punish our adversaries, by the same thou didst glorify us, whom thou hadst called. For the righteous children of good men did sacrifice secretly, and with one consent made a holy law, that the saints should be like partakers of the same good and evil. The fathers now singing out the songs of praise, but on the other side there sounded an ill according cry of the enemies, and a lamentable noise was carried abroad for children that were bewailed. Verse 11, the master and the servant were punished after one manner, and like as the king, so suffered the common person. So they altogether had innumerable dead with one kind of death, neither were the living sufficient to bury them. For in one moment the noblest offspring of them was destroyed. Verse 13, for whereas they would not believe anything by reason of the enchantments, speaking about the magicians, upon the destruction of the firstborn, they acknowledged this people to be the sons of Elohim. For while all things were in quiet silence, and that night was in the midst of her swift course, thine almighty word leaped from heaven out of thy royal throne, as a fierce man of war into the midst of a land of destruction, and brought thine unfeigned commandment as a sharp sword, and a standing up filled all things with death. And it touched the heaven, but it stood upon the earth. Then suddenly visions of horrible dreams troubled them sore, and terrors came upon them unlooked for. And one thrown here and another there, half dead, showed the cause his death. For the dreams that troubled them did foreshow this, lest they should perish and not know why they were afflicted. That's quite a mouthful. Quite a lot to get through, isn't it? But you see, again, keeping it simple, because I'm a simple fella. There's one divine action, there's two outcomes. One divine action, two outcomes. The same means that punish Egypt glorify Israel, verse 8. Israel's secret, united sacrifice and covenant fidelity in verse 9 are set over against Egypt's public lament in verses 10 and 12. So the magicians' enchantments, well, they collapse. The oppressors recognize the sons of Yahweh in verse 13. It's all coming together here in the text. In the midnight stillness, the Almighty Word, well, man, it's quite dramatic. He enters as a warrior, verses 14 through 16, and judgment becomes intensely personal right within that section of Scripture. And then you get into the terrors of verses 17 through 19. And this show that even perception is under verdict. Even perception is under verdict. Then finally, Solomon says, the tasting of death touched the righteous also, but only briefly, verse 20, preparing the way, in verses 21 and 25, for the priestly intercession. So the theme shifts to the plague where Aaron intercedes. So we're going from Passover to the plague where Aaron intercedes, of course, which happened on the heels of that. The magician's credibility collapses, and the state of his Israel and the status of Israel as Yahweh's chosen people is vindicated. One night, two outcomes. The point being, the creation, brethren, is not abstract. Judgment is very personal. It's a visitation of Yahweh's decree upon man. There's one act, but there's two destinies. The same night becomes judgment or salvation according to who you align with. Verse 8. It's all about alignment. It's all about alignment. The word is both a weapon and a shield. Ephesians 6. The Almighty Word, it says in the text, verses 14 through 16, is not the decisive force in history. The ritual, implements, they are merely instruments. They're not the source of power. And for the righteous, yes, there can be affliction. But our affliction is always brief and it is interpretive, verse 20. It's not annihilating. We're supposed to be learning from our afflictions. Even in the Brit Hadashah, this theme again is carried through a dual outcome of one message. In 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 15, we have an aroma of life versus a smell of death. In John chapter 1, verse 5, and in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 2, we have the word as an agent. It is a sharp sword. And in Revelation chapter 19, the word of Yahweh is a sword that actually comes out of a mouth. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, we have, of course, yehusha, our Passover. And again, in John chapter 19, we have all of the wonderful Passover timing. And finally, in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 5 through 11, we've got discipline. And in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12, we've got fiery testing. Because really, you and I as saints, we're going to see affliction. But that affliction educates, it doesn't destroy. And when hierarchy inverts, whether it's idolatry or injustices that have been done against you, elements reverse against your oppressors. Because when aligned, the same elements glorify the faithful, verse 8, but unsubmitted men are ultimately unmasked. The truth will always be revealed. Because as saints, we can suffer the same pressure as unbelievers, but with distinctly different outcomes, which goes back to my bursting pipes or making diamonds analogy. Let's make diamonds. Why burst pipes when you can make diamonds by directing the pressure that hits you efficiently and effectively? Don't run from pressure, run to pressure, because pressure will make you into a lively, living stone. Saints will endure short pain, but we have long payoffs. That's the difference. Yeah, there's going to be pain, but it's going to be short pain with long payoffs, because for the aligned, the hit is brief, but it's clarifying. You start to see everything so much clearer when the pain dissipates. The revealed word determines the differential of history. In chapter 18, verses 8 through 20, the same event is judgment for the unjust, but it is glory for the called out assembly. Israel can read the Passover night because they were formed before the night. Therefore, right order in our lives, it orders perception. And our perception, orders our destiny. Get rid of that stinking thinking. Order your perception, because it orders destiny. The same night that broke Egypt built Israel. When we keep the blood on the door, we keep our family in obedience. And the same word that cuts the wicked, it covers us. The lesson is, we win our battles in the secret place. Yahweh will make the truth public in his own time. Now is the day and age to really push in. Now is the day and age to really get aligned with the Most High, because the same pressure that crushes others will promote you and me to a whole new level of sainthood. So we've got to do the deep work, but we have to do the deep work in private, because Yahweh will handle the spotlight. Don't lean on false props like reeds in the marsh, like we read in Isaiah. Instead, carry the word that actually has the power to move things in your life. Look at verse 20. Yea, the tasting of death touched the righteous also. And there was a destruction of the multitude in the wilderness, but the wrath endured not long. For then the blameless man made haste and stood forth to defend them, and bringing the shield of his proper ministry, even prayer and the propitiation, I love that word, and the propitiation, and the propitiation, and the propitiation of incense, set himself against the wrath. I think it's my favorite word in the Bible. I love it. They cut it out in so many translations, though. I'm glad it's in this one. And the propitiation of the incense, set himself against the wrath, and so brought the calamity to an end, declaring that he was thy servant. So he overcame the destroyer, not with might of body nor force of arms, but with a word subdued him that punished, alleging oaths and covenants made with the fathers. For when the dead were now fallen down by heaps upon one another, standing between, he stayed the wrath and parted the way to the living. For in the long garment was the whole world, and in the 4 rows of the stones was the glory of the fathers graven, and thy majesty upon the diadem of his head. Unto these the destroyer gave place, and they were afraid of them. For it was enough that they only tasted of the wrath. So the blameless man in the text is obviously Aaron. Numbers chapter 16, of course, the plague breaks out. Aaron runs with a censer and he stands between the living and the dead. In verse 24, we see Aaron's garments. They're a microcosm of heaven and earth. We've got the robe. And of course, Israel's tribes, of course, the breastplate stones, reflective of Exodus chapter 28. And the name of the diadem, of course, reflective of Exodus chapter 28, verse 36. Solomon sees all of this as the vestments, because these are sacramental signs. The priest bears the world of Israel into Yahweh's presence. Yahweh's majesty is visibly upon him. How much more with our Kohen Hagadol, Yahushua HaMashiach? How much more does he bear the world and Israel into Yahweh's presence? He bears us into his presence. He carries us into his presence. That's an assurance for you and me. And what a better assurance, as the author of the book of Hebrews says. And when destruction spreads, Aaron runs, but not to attack, but to pray with incense and covenantal appeal. And the garments, which are identity, of course, they authorize the word, meaning you don't win because you shout loudest. It's not just because you've got the loudest voice. It's because you stand vested in the role that Yahweh determined for you in this life. Stand vested in your role, whatever it is. Your role is distinctly different than mine, and mine distinctly different than yours. Or maybe we have the same role. Just stand vested in your role, and your life will be a life full of purpose. The intercessor here wins by citing the word, by citing oaths, by citing covenants, calling upon Yahweh's promises to bear out in a crisis. Powerful stuff. So our knowledge of the word in prayer actually becomes debar, word leverage, which is what we saw at the temptation. When Satan tried to tempt Yahushua, what did Yahushua use? He used debar leverage. He used the word as leverage against Satan, and he was delivered. Yahweh stops plagues through priests, not through panic. Don't panic. And when things go bad out there in the world, don't panic. Pray, because Yahweh stops plagues through prayers, not panic. And when death moves through the camp, Yahweh looks for someone vested and blameless to run into the gap with prayer and incense. Not with a sword, but with a word. Spoken in prayer, spoken in oaths, spoken in covenants, spoken in love, and spoken in kindness. There's a lot in this chapter. A lot of wordsmithing. Thee, thy tithers. But all that to say this, brethren, Shabbat Shalom. Show up prepared. Speak the word that actually moves things, and watch the chaos step aside in your lives. You might taste the heat here and there. I know I have. But aligned people don't actually burn. We don't burn. We just feel the heat, but we don't burn. Wrath stops where a blameless, vested intercessor stands. So authority comes by covenant, and victory comes by the word. And we are victorious, as the word teaches us. Be uplifted, be encouraged, and come to the feasts and festivals of Yahweh, because there is covenantal security, and creation is working for you at Yahweh's appointed times of his Sabbaths and his Moedim. Shabbat Shalom. That was